Mark chapter 7, beginning of verse 31. Says, then Jesus returned from the region of Tyre and went through Sidon to the Sea of Galilee, in the region of the Decapolis. And they brought to him a man who was deaf and had a speech impediment. And they begged him to lay his hand on him. And taking him aside from the crowd privately, he put his fingers into his ears, and after spitting, touched his tongue. And looking up to heaven, he sighed and said to him, Ephphatha, that is, be opened. And his ears were opened. His tongue was released, and he spoke plainly. And Jesus charged them to tell no one, but the more he charged them, the more zealously they proclaimed it. And they were astonished beyond measure, saying, he has done all things well. He even makes the deaf hear and the mute speak. He does all things well. Jesus does all things well. When I see you, I see that Jesus does all things well. When I see us, I realize that Jesus does all things well. Let's just take this all the way back to creation. Consider the sun that he created. There is enough nuclear power in that sun right now to burn for another 5 billion years. And then 95.508 million miles away from that sun, he created the earth. The earth that is spinning at 67,000 miles per hour around that sun with a little bit of a wobble. It takes it 365 days and 6 hours to make it all the way around. And then 238,900 miles away from the earth, he created a moon. And that moon keeps our wobble in check. That moon wanders around this earth at 27 days. 7 hours and 43 minutes. It's a pretty neat structure. It keeps the tide on the Atlantic Ocean from just swiping over Florida and eliminating all of us. It keeps seasons in the state of Florida so that it's smoking hot in the summer. And then not quite as hot in the winter. And of course at night, it reflects the light from the sun so that our cycles of growth are not interrupted on the earth. Consider creation, how it all works. Consider us. Like there is a 1 in 400 trillion chance that you're even here this morning. Consider how he created you. 100 billion neurons in your nervous system that just allows you to do all the amazing things that you did just to get here this morning, as ordinary as you think that was, all according to the plan of God. 206 bones, 600 muscles. We are fascinating. But then let's consider how we really got here. At least 3 generations are in this room. My mom was born in Brownsville, Texas. That's down on the border of Texas and Mexico. And then 1,761 miles north and east of that, my dad was born in Wanchese, North Carolina. Now, how in the world does somebody in Wanchese find somebody from Texas? They found each other, fell in love, had kids. I'm one of them. My wife's family, her dad born and raised in North Georgia. Mom born in Florida. Somehow found each other, fell in love, married in Tampa, Florida, had kids. There my wife is in Tampa, there I am in Lakeland. How in the world does that happen? Just that there was life in Lakeland that drew them over. In some way, somehow, we found each other, fell in love, and had kids. And without all that, from Brownsville to Wanchese, from Georgia to Florida, there'd be no Walt. There'd be no Kate. There'd be no Lucy. There'd be no Claire. Think about your story. Think about all that God did to bring you right here for such a time as this. And don't you take that for granted. And let me say this. When you look out And you wonder, is it ever going to happen? Are the promises of God going to be made manifest in your life? Think about what he's already done. Think about what he already created. He does all things well. God does all things well. And he will keep doing all things well. So let's jump back to the beginning of this. It says that he was coming back from the region of Tyre and Sidon. Now, what he was going to do in the region of Decapolis is actually the same thing that he did in Tyre and Sidon. But he didn't go there for that reason. He went there to get a little break. He went over there because he went to a place where he wasn't called to ministry. So while he's over there resting, while his soul is resting, sometimes it's good to get out of the place where you work to find rest. Sometimes when you stay in the place where you work all the time, where you dwell all the time, it can always stay on you. But it's nice to just take a little break, drive to Plant City, go to breakfast in Bartow. Just get a break. Just step outside of the world that you're always in. Jesus just stepped aside. And while he was over there, though, there was somebody that heard that the presence of Jesus was in the house. Anytime we believe that the presence of Jesus is somewhere, it should draw us to that place. So Jesus is in that place, and a lady who was a Canaanite came to him. Now, if you're a little bit new to the Bible, you probably realize, at least this, that the Canaanites were not the happiest people in the sight of God in the Old Testament. So she, a Canaanite woman, comes to the feet of Jesus, and she says, "My daughter is possessed by the devil. And I'm asking you to set her free." And he said nothing. She said, "Lord, I'm asking you to set him free." He said nothing. She asked again. This time his disciples said, they begged him to send her away. Now, in our text, these people are begging that Jesus works a miracle. But when he's in Tyre and Sidon, his disciples are begging that he doesn't do a miracle. We need to be careful when we're hanging around people that don't want to see miracles in our lives. We need to make sure that those persons who just don't want us to see a miracle in our lives for whatever reason, maybe they just don't want us to have something that God has promised. Maybe they don't believe that God has promised. Maybe they don't believe that God will do it. Their lack of belief will actually negatively impact us. So we have to be careful. So the disciples were begging him not to do anything. And then Jesus says to her, "Look, my ministry is in Israel, not here." And she says, "That's true. But Lord, even the dogs eat from the master's table." And he says, "You have great faith. Therefore, your daughter is made whole." He just spoke a word, and immediately her daughter was set free. Now, I want to set this up because the same thing that we see in Tyre and Sidon is the same thing that we see happening right here in the region of Decapolis. She came to him. She drew near to the presence of God. When she was not receiving what she was asking for, she kept on asking. She didn't just ask once and walk away. She asked until she received an answer from heaven. So now we're here in the region of Decapolis, and we see the same thing necessary. We see people that come to Jesus. I'm making a big deal about this because we live in a generation where we are starting to neglect the basic principles of our faith. We are starting to see things like apathy, and we're calling apathy faith. Sitting around, doing nothing, just expecting God to move a mountain. We're calling that faith. It's laziness. There is required of us faith that draws near to him. I was finished prepping, almost finished prepping on Wednesday, about to push print. And I don't know how you guys work, but I have to have noise. I sleep with a noise machine. When I'm studying, there's music playing in the background. If I want to have a great conversation with my wife, I have to be driving or walking. Like I'm just like, there are two sides of me, and one has to be like committed to something else so that the other side works. I usually don't know what's happening over here. That's why my driving's so bad. I'm actually focused on the conversation. I just happen to be driving. So I'm finishing up, and I hear this over in the background, and there's a lady singing, and she's just singing, there's no striving in his presence, there's no striving in his presence. I'm like, what am I listening to? I don't know how your YouTube stream is, but mine just jumps from one thing to the next thing to the next thing to the next thing, and I have to put up with commercials, and then I've been listening to 30 minutes of commercials, have to skip ads because I finally realize it's there. I'm one of those. I'm too cheap to pay for premium. I'm not paying for what's free. I'm not doing it. I don't care. I can skip ads. I can do that. So, I got to rewind. I got to find out what's context here. There's no striving in his presence. She just keeps singing it. And when she sings it, everybody gets all excited and they all start clapping. And I'm like, wait, what are you talking about? There's no striving in his presence. Of course there's striving. They're striving to get into his presence. They're striving in his presence. Of course we are striving. Why are we so bent on doing nothing? What is it about doing nothing that excites us today? Because when you do nothing, you have nothing. Let's look at it from a salvation perspective, because I know sometimes people's heads are going to tilt a little. So let's just do this. Let's just take it to the most basic part of our faith, our salvation. Like, without that, there's nothing to build upon. So let's talk salvation for just a minute. Ephesians Chapter 2 and verse 8 says, by grace you have been saved through faith. This is not your own doing. It is the gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one will boast. Verse 10, for we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works. We are saved by what? Grace. Through what? Faith. Salvation is grace and faith. It's not just grace. But it's also not just works, because if it was just works, then what? Then we would be able to boast. And so this is what the conversation should flow from this text. Not that we should do nothing, but that our trust or our faith is not in the thing that we're doing. If somebody sees you doing well, and they come up to you and they say, wow, I wanna be like you. Tell me about you. Well, I'm saved. Jesus saved me. Oh, I know that, but I want to know the part that you're doing. The part that I'm doing doesn't matter if he didn't save me. Let's go back to my trust, my confidence isn't in this thing that I'm doing. This thing that I'm doing, those are just the good works that he prepared beforehand for me to do. My striving isn't to be saved. My striving is to do the works. Why? Because he commanded me to. This takes me back to my salvation. What is salvation? It's by grace through faith. What does faith look like? It hears the word. Romans says, we believe it in our heart that God raised Jesus from the dead. And we confess with our mouth. What do we confess? Jesus is Lord. That word Lord means something. When I make that statement, all of the sudden, he is master. What did she say at the table? Yes, but even the dogs eat the crumbs from the master's table. When you say Jesus is Lord, what you're saying is me and everything about me just became subordinate to him. My life is no longer my own. My life is a slave to him. I am a servant of God. When you said Jesus is Lord, that wasn't just a pretty phrase that we paint on a wall or put on a bumper sticker or strap across our shirt. It means you are a servant of God. Amen. That's what it means. So now that I'm a servant of God, there are works that he has created me to do. What am I striving to do the works he called me to do? Philippians 1 says, I am striving side by side for the sake of the gospel. Philippians 3, he goes on, says, I forget what's behind and I strive forward to what lies ahead. I don't get what lies ahead without that straining, without that striving. The things that we do actually matter. Let's look at it like this, because he says it very clearly in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and verse 1. He says, I remind you, my brothers. That means he'd already told them this. He's writing them a letter to remind them of what he'd already told them. This was a theme in the preaching of the Apostle Paul regarding salvation. I remind you, brothers, of the gospel that I preached to you, which you received, in which you stand, and by which you are being saved. The gospel that you received, in the gospel that you stand, and the gospel by which you are being saved. If you hold fast to the word that was preached to you, unless you believed in vain. What is belief that is in vain? Belief with no works. Am I saved by the works? No. I'm saved for the works. But do I remain in faith without works? No, I don't. And if I have no faith, can I hold fast to the grace of God that he's given me? No. So do your works matter? Yes. Are you saved by them? No. But they matter. So here's my point. This relationship that these guys had with this person who could not hear and could not speak, that relationship mattered so much so that when they heard about the presence of Jesus, they wanted to take their friend and bring him into the presence of God. Did it matter that they brought him from where he was to the presence of God? Yes. Would this man have received his healing in the absence of what they did? No. Now, would he have received it later? Sure, if they did something. Would he have received it in that moment? If they stayed where they were, if they didn't move, would he have received that? No. And it's no different for us, because there are a lot of us, we want God to move in our careers. We want God to move in our families. We want God to move in our parenting, and we're sitting around wanting him to do everything, and he isn't moving until you do. Why? Because he already did. Grace happened before you existed. Now, to receive the grace that he's offered you, you have to do something. That is what we call faith. And this is what we see in the lifestyle of this man who received a miracle. Had he not been brought to the presence of Jesus, it would not have happened. Now, let me push into that a little bit. Because this didn't happen in every city where Jesus was. It happened in Tyre and Sidon. It happened in the region of Decapolis. But when Jesus went to his hometown, it's not what we see at all. In fact, in Matthew chapter 13 and verse 58, it says that there in Nazareth, where Jesus was born, in his hometown, there Jesus did not do many mighty works because of their unbelief. When you believe something, you will respond. If they heard Jesus was there, but they didn't bring the sick to him, if they didn't bring the sick, why didn't they? Because they didn't believe he could do anything. We don't move when we don't believe he won't move. Let me put it out there like this. I'm almost terrified of sharks. Like, the idea of sharks really makes me nervous. As a child, my dad took me to Jaws in 3D. And sorry, you have to blame your parents for something, right? No, like I'm not a shark fan. I don't. But I went into SeaWorld one time, and they've got this shark encounter, and you're in this little tube and a conveyor belt, and it's 700,000 gallons of water and sharks, and they're just bumping in. And I didn't care. I'm like, nah. I'm within inches of a shark. I didn't care. Why? Because I didn't believe it could hurt me based on where I am. So I didn't move. I did nothing. But I guarantee you, if I'm in the ocean, on a board, on a jet ski, on a boat, on anything, if I see a shark, I don't care if it's 300 feet away. I'm going the other way. Why? Because I believe it can harm me. Because I believe something, what I believe causes me to respond. What we have done in Christianity is we have gone ahead and called apathy faith. We've gone ahead and said, if you are not responding, you still have faith. That's not true. If you have no response, you have no faith. Faith has to have a response. Faith is not just what you say you believe. It is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. What is evidence that you believe something that you haven't seen, that you respond to what you believe, that you do something? Faith is always two parts. Always. Salvation is always two parts. Always. Salvation is grace. That's all God all by himself. And then it's faith. That's how you respond to what you hear. Always. This is how this works. I'm pushing this issue because I know that God has a lot for us that we will never see if we don't move into it. If we don't actually step forward, you will never see the miracle in your house if you don't step towards the miracle. You'll never see it. We cannot keep doing what we've always done and expect something to change. Ever. So in his own hometown, he did no mighty work. Why? Because they did not believe. Hebrews chapter 4 and verse 2 says, indeed, the gospel was preached to us as well as to them. Yet the word that they heard did not profit them, not being mixed with faith in those who heard it. They heard the same gospel. This group heard the gospel. This group heard the gospel. This group, nothing happened for them. Did that mean God didn't love them? No. Does that mean God didn't have a plan for them? No. Does that mean God just wants them to be lost and go to hell and miserable? No. What did it mean? It meant they had no faith. They had no faith. What did this group have? Faith. And what happened? It profited them. Now, let me say this, because this is going to matter in a few minutes, but I want to make sure we introduce it here. Here's what that text does not say, the Matthew text, when it says he could there do no mighty work. It doesn't mean that whenever there's no mighty work that there's no faith. What it means is when there's no faith, there's no mighty work. We have to make sure it's not one of these A plus B equals C things, because here's why. Because sometimes it's timing. Sometimes your faith isn't the issue, it's your faithfulness. When it's faithfulness, it is continuing to do what you've been doing. It's not that you don't have faith, it's you need to continue in the faith that you have, because the faith that you have right now is for something that isn't for right now, but it's for later. But if you stop having faith when the time comes for you to have it, you won't have it. Why? Because you gave up. Right? So just because you don't receive something doesn't mean you don't have faith. It's either faith or it's timing. And this is why discernment in the body of Christ actually matters. That you need to have a handle on you, an awareness of you. Do you have faith? Yes or no? If no, you better get some. You better get some. If yes, you have it, then just keep being faithful, because all that means is it's not time yet. There is a timing to God. Like this isn't just we get to decide what we want whenever we want it. Grace has to precede faith. There can be no faith in the absence of grace. What is grace? That's God all by himself. Those are all the decisions that God makes all by himself. Here was the thing. Was God moving at this time? Yes, he was moving at this time, but his hometown did not believe it. We see in the book of Acts that Jesus went around town to town doing good and healing all who were oppressed of the devil. Was it a season of the miraculous? Yes. Was Decapolis prepared? Yes. Was Tyre and Sidon prepared? Yes. Was Nazareth prepared? No. Was it the timing of God? Yes. Was he moving? Yes. Did they receive? No. Why? No faith. But it was the time. And so we have to recognize in our lives, is it this thing or is it this thing? So how we behave actually matters. You think about this morning, think about this experience right now that we've all been invited into. There was a moment when Jesus was on a donkey on the Mount of Olives, and he was coming down. And on his descent down on this donkey, they began to put their jackets and blankets on the ground that the donkey wouldn't even get dirty. That the donkey would walk on this clean space in reverence of the one who was on the donkey. It wasn't about the donkey. It was about Jesus. I got asked the other day, I hope this isn't too, well, Dad, close your ears for a minute. This young preacher says, how do you not be arrogant? I'm like, you mean as a preacher? He's like, yeah, I mean, people tell you do a good job. I'm like, oh, yeah, no, it's just perspective. You as a preacher are just the jackass upon whom Jesus rides into town every Sunday morning. That's it. That's all you are. Period. There's no arrogance in that. That's all I am. Eon, eon. So they prepared for the donkey upon whom Jesus is riding. Jesus gets to the bottom. And the religious people, they get frustrated. Sorry, Dad, he's all fun. Gets to the bottom. And the religious people are like, you can't let them praise out and act like this. And he says, yeah, if they remain silent, the very rocks will cry out. Like, you're supposed to do something. You're actually supposed to. Psalm 100 verse 2 says, serve the Lord with gladness. Why isn't it a glad thing to serve Jesus? Why isn't it a glad thing to endure? Why isn't it a glad thing to obey the gospel? Why isn't that a glad? Why can't we get home at the end of the day exhausted and be like, I followed you today, Jesus? Why doesn't that bring excitement? I don't know how you feel, but when I finish something, I'm like pretty excited. If I paint a wall, I'm like, man, that looks good. I go out and buy presents. I come home, wrap them. People like them. I feel good about that. You know who doesn't feel good? Let me tell you who doesn't feel good. The one that sits on the couch who brought nothing. And we want to make up some stupid theology that makes the person feel good who's sitting on the couch doing nothing. Absolutely not. Do something. Do something. Your happiness will not be found in doing nothing. Serve the Lord with gladness. Come into his presence with singing. It wasn't one of these, there's no striving in his presence. No, come into his presence with singing. Do something. Strive. Malachi 3:10. Bring the full tithe. You bring it. I come into his presence. I bring the full tithe into the storehouse so that there is food in his house. And then he says, put me to the test, says the Lord, if I will not open the windows of heaven for you and pour down for you a blessing until there's no more need. What predicated the blessing? You bringing your gift. You coming into his presence with singing. You bringing the full tithe into his house. You doing something predicated. It came before the moment where he just takes a blessing that there's not room enough to contain and pours it out over you. But what about if you walk in his house with no worship and no gift? Here's that blessing. It stays right inside the windows of heaven. Because it's not an entitlement. Salvation isn't an entitlement. Everybody's not just going to be saved. That salvation comes through faith. In the absence of faith, there is no salvation. In the absence of movement, there is no blessing. It matters that they brought the man to Jesus. It actually matters. In James chapter 4 and verse 8, he says, draw near to God, and God will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners. Purify your hearts, you double-minded. There's always the part we got to work on. But the drawing near matters. Coming to him matters. And then he goes on. He says, humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will exalt you. We are wanting to be exalted. We're praying for promotion, and yet we haven't drawn near. We're not coming into his presence with singing. We're not coming to him. We're making it a new theology to just sit at home in bed, push play on the computer, and suddenly that's like being in the presence of God. Really? Really? I mean, Christianity's not like cooking a burrito in the microwave, man. Hebrews chapter 4 and verse 16 says the same thing. Let us with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, where we might receive mercy and find grace to help in our time of need. I think it's a pretty big deal that I can show up and find mercy. What does that mean? That means that I can show up and receive mercy for my imperfections. Striving is not about perfection. The opposite of striving is not. It is not imperfection. The opposite of striving is doing nothing. I can do something while being imperfect. I bring my imperfections to Him and I receive mercy for those imperfections. Those imperfections do not keep me from the presence of God. This man had a speech impediment. This man could not hear. He had an imperfection, and that imperfection did not keep him out of the presence of God. Rather, he drew all near all the more. Why? Because the answer was in the throne of God. The answer was in the presence of Jesus. When we get that, our stupidity will not keep us from the presence of God, but we will know I'm going to go find mercy for my imperfection. And then I'm going to get there, and not only am I going to receive mercy for my imperfection, but I'm going to go looking around for favor now. Where is the favor of God? God, I'm in your presence. I'm at your feet. Where is your grace? There it is. I will receive that by faith. You find favor. What does that mean? That means I'm looking for it. It means I'm striving. It means I'm doing something. Where is the favor of God? It's not here. Where is it? It's not here. Where? There it is. There it is. I'm drawing near with confidence. How can I confidently draw near to Him in my imperfection? Because I come into His presence with singing, because I bring my gift to His feet. I'm doing exactly what He told me to do to draw near to Him, so I can do it with confidence. So how they lived mattered. How they got there actually mattered. Now let's look at what Jesus did. Here in this moment, they beg Him. They're there, they're begging Him, will you lay hands on him? We kind of get a little uncomfortable with begging. Let me just kind of brush through this if I could. Begging actually is not a bad thing. The New Testament calls it supplication. It's just a cuter word for begging. Philippians chapter 4 and verse 6, do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. Prayer, that's just kind of simple. Lord, help me. Supplication is you are desperate. My friend can't hear. My friend can't speak. And I want the best that God has for him. So Jesus, I'm falling on my face and I'm begging you. Would you please heal him? Like there's a begging. It's a supplication. It's a humbling yourself before God. It's a being desperate in his presence. We don't want to act like we're going to walk in with some kind of God, I just heal him right now. You better check yourself. Let me tell you what, faith is never arrogant. Faith is never, ever arrogant. You show up because you have a gift. Hey, I've got my money, now do something. Try that. I sang louder than my neighbor. Do something. No. No, that's why he had to say it's not by works. You're striving for them. You're commanded to do them, but it's not because of them. You won't have it without them, but it's not because of them. Shawn, that doesn't make sense. I don't care. Argue with Jesus. He told me to do them, and they don't matter, but he told me to do them. I'm doing them, but I'm not earning anything. I'm obeying, not earning. There's a difference. And so there in that place, they were begging him. There was a fervency in that prayer. We see that in James chapter 5 and verse 16. It says, pray for one another and you will be healed. That's interesting. And he goes on, for the effective, fervent prayer of a righteous person has great power as it is working. Effective, fervent. A fervent prayer is supplication. A fervent prayer is a desperate prayer. A fervent prayer is a prayer that says, God, in the absence of your movement, I'm sunk. I have to have you. You are my only hope, my only help. Save me, deliver me, bless me, help me, Jesus. And you don't stop until you receive. You don't stop. Don't stop because you asked once. Stop when you receive. So what did Jesus do? This is what blows my mind. They're begging him to what? To lay hands on him. But what did he do? He didn't lay hands on him. Now this is where me and the gospel, I love the word. They're begging him, lay hands on him. Jesus already said, you're going to lay hands on the sick and they're going to recover. They're begging, lay hands on him. What does he do? Sticks his finger in his ear, spits, and touches his tongue. Don't think you have Jesus figured out. Let me just tell you, don't write a book and say, do this, then do this, then do this, and God, no, don't do that. No. They begged him, Jesus, lay your hands on him. And Jesus said, okay. But what did he do before that? That's where I want to sit for a minute. Because this is the part of the gospel we always want to clean up. Jesus sighed, and then he looked to heaven. And that doesn't seem like a big deal to you guys, but there was a spiritual gift in operation in that sigh. We see the same command to us in Romans 8:26. What they captured in this text was for us to see the demonstration in the moment of what would be a doctrine in the future. Jesus sighed. The sigh in Romans 8:26 looks like this. The Spirit helps us in our weakness. For we do not know what to pray for as we ought to, but the Spirit himself makes intercession for us with groanings too deep for words. We get lost in the English. The Greek is the same word sigh, the same word groaning. It's the same thing. Jesus groaned by the Spirit preceding the miracle so that he would receive the wisdom necessary. Do I just lay hands on him? Do I stick my feet? He said, I do nothing except what my Father tells me. Not because he was less than the Father, but because when the Word became flesh, he demonstrated to us in the flesh how we were supposed to live. Jesus didn't show us how to be God. Jesus showed us how to be us. Jesus demonstrated how we are supposed to live. So what did Jesus do? He sighed. That is a groaning in the Spirit. He also then moved to hear wisdom. I'm not going to just lay hands on, but I'm going to do what my Father tells me to do. There was discernment that preceded the prayer or followed the prayer. It has to happen. We can't just assume we actually know. When we don't know how to pray as we ought to, what do? We allow the Spirit to pray through us. When you have somebody that cannot pray for themselves, you are praying for them, but you don't know how to pray for them, but it's really the Spirit of God. Are you doing the praying? Yes. Are you making the sounds? Yes. But who's actually praying? The Spirit. Who's he praying for? This guy. This gal. If you, by the Spirit, can pray for someone else, you, by the Spirit, can pray for yourself, even when you don't know how to. And we see Jesus do it, and we see the command in Romans 8. And we're like, yeah. But I mean, sounds that are too deep for words, Shawn. I mean, come on. I mean, that's a little much. Aren't we past that? We sometimes think we're so evolved. We're like so smart. So at the gym, there are a group of people at the gym, and they lift really heavy things. And I don't know if you've been to a gym, but when people are over in the side where they lift really heavy things, it's loud. It's really loud. And it's like, they're there. Aah! And it's easy to be over here on this side with just the over 40 workout, just a nice little pump. And look over there like, what's wrong with these guys? I'll tell you what's wrong. They're lifting heavy things. That's what's wrong. If I went over there where they were and I went, ah! Why? Because some things are just too deep for words. See, you've never picked up anything heavy, so you don't know what that's about. You've never worked, so you don't know what that's about. You just decided to be comfortable in what little bit your life looked like, and rather than stepping out and following God and doing something a little more difficult, you want to judge somebody who's making a little bit of noise because God asked them to pick something up that's heavy. I've seen 4 children be born. It's not quiet. No, I'm for real. It's not quiet. And I can look there and say, I don't be so loud about it. Because I've never given birth to anything. It's easy to judge the noise somebody makes when you aren't giving birth to anything. But when God has called you to give birth to a family or to a business or to a move of God, let me just tell you something. There's going to be some noise that is too deep for words. And it's not just a bunch of charismatics being weird. It is a bunch of people following Jesus, obeying Jesus, who are doing what is necessary to follow Jesus. Because when you don't know how to pray as you ought to, there will be sounds that are too deep for words, and they'll help you pick up heavy things, and they will help you give birth to new life. Some of you, your kids aren't serving God, and you just want to give these little prayers, oh God, help them. You need to give birth to their life. Jesus sighed. And then what did he say? Epheta. Be opened. Be opened. Because there was an ear that wasn't functioning the way an ear was supposed to function. We make these random sounds, and they disrupt otherwise peaceful air. And they create vibrations, waves. Those waves mean nothing to your eyeballs. Those waves mean nothing to your nose. But when those waves hit your ear, all of a sudden, by the creation of Almighty God, who does all things well, they go into a canal and they hit a drum and they start vibrating. And the vibration on that drum causes these bones to rattle. And when those bones rattle, it amplifies the sound and sends it across these tiny little hairs. And those tiny little hairs, as they bend like trees in the wind, suddenly the tops of them open up, and it causes an energy to be created from the vibration so that your brain can actually process that as sound. Apparently, something in those little hairs wasn't opening up for some reason. And Jesus, who does all things well, said, "Be opened." And they opened up, and suddenly he could hear. And when he could hear, his tongue was loosed, and he could speak. Why? Because he does all things well. We need to quit cleaning up the gospel. Why did he say, like, there were just a few times in this text, in the gospel, where Jesus' words in Aramaic were left, and then the Greek translation was said to the side. Sometimes I wonder, why did they do that? I mean, the whole thing was spoken in Aramaic. Why was it necessary? You ever wondered, like, when he said, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, my God, why have you forsaken me? You ever wonder, why did they include it in the Aramaic and then turn around and put it in the Greek, which was then translated into English? Why? A couple of reasons, but primarily, it probably was just to give a demonstration of how the generations and the languages that follow would be required to accurately translate the words of God so that we can depend on what we're reading. We don't take the gospel and clean it up. They didn't take what he said and cleaned it up. They didn't look at it and say, be opened. Why don't we say be healed? No. He said be opened. That's what he said. He sighed. He groaned. We don't clean up the gospel. They did a movie a few years ago, Mary Magdalene. I don't ever go watch usually movies that they take creative liberties in with the gospel. I'm just trying to live by the gospel itself. I don't need to add anything to it. And the actor got to the part where Jesus saw a blind person and he spit on the ground, made mud, and put it on his eyes. And he said, I wasn't about to do that. He said, I was familiar with the story in the Bible, but that's just ridiculous. That's a terrible way to introduce somebody to seeing. Says who? Like, what? And this is what we've done in our generation. Let me be a little bit, if I haven't already. We say things like, oh, people won't understand if we say it like that, so we need to say it this way. What do you mean they won't understand? We're the smartest generation that has ever walked the earth. Like, I'm for real. Like, I don't think I'm looking at a bunch of morons. I don't have to dumb the gospel down. You are smarter than any church group that's ever sat in an auditorium and heard preaching. You have more information that is accessible to you than ever before. You know more than has ever been known. This is not the time to diminish the gospel. What we mean by that is it's not that we want to make it so that people can understand it. We want to make it so that it's comfortable for people. I don't care about it being comfortable. If Jesus wasn't worried about the level of comfort, that's not me. That's above my pay grade. Did Jesus groan? Yes, he groaned. Then you know what? I'm groaning. Are there groanings that are too deep for words? Absolutely. If this is how it's supposed to be, then this is how I'm supposed to live. And I don't have to worry about cleaning it up because I'm not worried about living clean. What I'm worried about is birthing things in this kingdom. What I'm worried about is picking up the stuff that I've been called to pick up. I'm not looking to just be somebody that just watches comfort all around me. We just had a group from this church leave, 12 of them. They took a flight from here to Miami to Nicaragua. Then they took a 10-hour ride up and through just nothing to go build a church so that the people in that village could show up and worship Jesus. That's work. Pastor Ben talked about youth camp. We had young adults and adults go live without sleep to manage teenagers for a week so that they could experience the power of God. It didn't just happen. Young adults teenagers came and worked during VBS for a whole week, every single night, so that children could experience the power of God. Another group are going to get on a bus tomorrow and take children to a camp. Why? So that they can experience the power of God. Another group of people are going to get on a flight and go to Peru to do missions work so that others can experience the power of God. Like, it takes effort to get anything done. And here's the thing. It's the same in your life. Man, what does God want to do for you? What does he want to do in your life? What are you wondering about? Where are your questions? Get on your knees. Get on your knees. Do you have no clue about your future? Then that might just be something you need to give birth to. That might mean that you need to get in prayer. It might mean that you have to lift a few heavy things for that promotion, to get some things out of the way to clear a pathway for you to walk through to the goodness of God. What do you need to do to experience God do all things well? Because here's what we know. God does all things well. That's what we know. And so when you find yourself connecting to the power of God, he will do all things well in your life. Yes, he will. And what is he asking you to do to get into his presence so that he will do it? Then just do it.